I'm Nathan, and I want to start today with something a friend of mine says for a living. He's a materials guy. He looks at broken things, a snapped bolt, a cracked weld, a hip implant that failed in somebody's body, and he tells you exactly what happened to it and when. And the line he always uses is this: every part remembers where it came from. Steel keeps a record. Heat it, bend it, load it wrong for 3 years, and it writes all of that down inside itself, in a language most people can't read. I've been sitting with that idea for a week now, because of the story I'm about to tell you. It starts with the most boring injury in the world. A kid rolls his ankle at soccer practice. His dad drives him to urgent care, the doctor orders an x-ray, and everybody expects to be home by dinner with an ice pack and a boot. Instead, the doctor came back into the room without the scan in his hands and said, "Sir, there's something here that shouldn't be possible. And the reason I want you to stay with me isn't the twist, although there is one. It's the part almost nobody thinks about. A child's body keeps a record too. It writes down every single thing that was done to it. And if you know how to read it, a broken ankle can bring down an entire empire." Jasper Bowden had spent 19 years learning to read the handwriting of broken things. He was the principal metallurgist at Halyard Materials Engineering, a low-grade building on the industrial edge of Wolcott, Indiana, with a loading dock, a scanning electron microscope, and a wall of failed parts in labeled bins. Companies sent him disasters: a crane hook that let go over a job site, a steering knuckle from a car that left the road, a titanium screw that snapped inside a woman's spine 11 months after somebody put it there. Jasper would cut a section, polish it, etch it, and put it under the beam, and then he would sit down at a keyboard and write a report that read like a confession he had translated from a language the part had been speaking all along. He was not a large man, and he was not a loud one. He was 43, with reading glasses pushed up into hair that had gone gray early, and a habit of going quiet in exactly the moments other people got loud. His father, Jasper Bowden, had been a tool and die maker for 31 years in a shop 2 counties over, and had taught Jasper the whole philosophy before he was 12, standing at a bench with a cracked die block in his hands. "Anybody can tell you a thing is broken," Sherman said. "It takes work to tell you why, and the why is the only part that stops it happening again." Jasper had married Nadine Ainsworth when they were both 26. She was quick and warm and completely allergic to stillness, which at first felt like the best thing that had ever happened to him. She came from a family that measured people. Her father had run a truck dealership and kept a plaque in the hall for every year the store finished first in the district, and Nadine had grown up understanding that the plaque was the point, and the year was just the thing that produced it. Her older brother Drake had been a genuinely good goalkeeper until he wasn't, and the family had never entirely forgiven either him or the sport. Their son, Callum, was born in the spring, and by the time he was 6, it was obvious he had something. Not the thing parents imagine when they're at the field with a folding chair and a thermos. An actual thing. He saw the field 2 seconds before it happened. He was the smallest kid on every roster, and he was never, ever, where anyone expected him to be. Concord Football Club noticed him when he was 8. Concord was the big program in that part of the state, and it lived at a place called the Ridgeway Complex. 12 fields, an indoor dome, a turf building with a glass front, and a mural of a boy's silhouette running out of a cornfield towards stadium lights. Concord had a director named Emil Vesey, and Emil Vesey had a program inside the program that everyone in the parking lot referred to, in the reverent way people talk about the weather in a place that gets tornadoes, as the pathway. Emil was 51, tanned in February, with a soft voice that made you lean in, and a way of putting one hand on a father's shoulder, while he told him something about his own child that the father had always suspected and never dared say out loud. He had played in Europe, allegedly. He had a framed shirt in his office. He talked about windows, the window at 9, the window at 11, the window at 13, and he made every window sound like it was closing while you stood there deciding. Nadine was in love with the pathway before she was ever in love with Emil, and both of those things happened long before Jasper noticed either one. By the time Callum was 11, the Bowden's life had a shape that Jasper had agreed to one small yes at a time. $18,000 a year for a boys' club soccer. 4 practices a week, an hour each way. Showcase tournaments in Columbus and Kansas City and Bradenton. a nutrition and recovery program that Nadine handled. Because Jasper worked odd hours and she was better at it, she said, and it was easier if she just took him. She took him a lot. Tuesdays and Fridays, an appointment she called the clinic, which Jasper understood to be physical therapy and mobility work, the kind of thing everybody's kid apparently did now. She drove him herself. She kept the paperwork on her own laptop. Once, when Jasper asked to come, she looked at him with genuine surprise and said, "It's 40 minutes of a man pushing on his hamstrings, Jasper. You'd lose your mind." And Callum was extraordinary. That was the thing. That was always the thing. At 11, he was playing up an age group and still doing whatever he wanted with the ball. And grown men Jasper had never met would find him at the fence line and tell him what he had. Jasper stood in a lot of cold parking lots that year, feeling a pride so uncomplicated it embarrassed him. He also noticed, in the low background way you notice a hum in a building, that his son was tired. Not tired like a boy who plays too much. Tired like a man. Callum fell asleep in the car at 4 in the afternoon. He had headaches he described with a small shrug, as though headaches were simply a feature of being alive. His jaw looked different in photographs from the year before, heavier, and when Jasper mentioned it, Nadine laughed and said he was growing, which was a thing that happened to boys. And did Jasper want to make him self-conscious about his own face? There was one other thing, and Jasper thought about it for a long time afterward. In February, Callum had come out of the shower, and Jasper had seen a small dark bruise low on the back of his left arm, above the elbow, with a bead of dried blood in the center of it. He'd asked. Callum had said, without any hesitation at all, "Cleat," and gone to find socks. It was February. They were playing indoor. Jasper had filed it, the way you file a number that's slightly off in a spreadsheet you don't own, and moved on. The ankle happened on a Thursday in October, at 6:40 in the evening, on the near field at Ridgeway under the lights. It was nothing. That was the thing everyone kept saying afterward. It was nothing. It was the most ordinary injury in the sport. Callum had gone to plant on his right foot at the top of the box, and his cleat had caught a seam in the turf, and he had gone down sideways with a sound like somebody dropping a bag of laundry. He was up in 9 seconds. He tried to jog and his face changed and he sat down again on the turf with his hands behind him and looked over at the sideline for his father, because his mother was on the phone by the fence with her back to the field. Jasper had him in the truck by 7. He'd texted Nadine from the parking lot. She'd texted back, "On my way," and then arrived at Wolcott Sports Medicine and Urgent Care 11 minutes after they did, with her keys still in her hand and her coat still on, and she had been strange from the moment she came through the door. Jasper noticed it, because noticing was his profession. She didn't ask Callum where it hurt. She asked the front desk, twice, whether they were doing imaging. She sat down and then stood up and went to look at a rack of pamphlets she did not read. When the tech came out with a clipboard and asked for insurance and date of birth, Nadine answered before Jasper could open his mouth, and gave the date, and then said, "He's 11, in the tone of a woman correcting a bill. Jasper had not thought anything of it. It's important to say that. He was a man in a plastic chair at 8 at night with a boy leaning on his shoulder, and he was thinking about ice and a walking boot, and whether they'd be back for the Saturday game. The doctor was named Soren Ackley. He was maybe 35, tall, with the slightly apologetic energy of someone who had been on shift since 6 a.m. He'd been friendly on the way in. He'd made a joke about turf seams. He had taken Callum down the hall himself and come back with him 20 minutes later and said the images would take a few minutes and gone away again. Then he was gone a lot longer than a few minutes. At 8:41, Jasper watched through the gap in the door as Ackley came back down the corridor. He was walking differently. He had no tablet in his hands and no film and no laptop, nothing at all, and he stopped outside the room for a full 3 seconds with his hand on the frame before he came in. "Mr. Bowden," he said. And then he did something Jasper had seen witnesses do in depositions and had never once seen a doctor do. He looked at Nadine, and then he looked back at Jasper, and he chose. "Sir," Ackley said, "there's something here that shouldn't be possible." The room went very quiet. Callum, 11 years old, with an ice pack on his ankle and his phone face down on his lap, looked up at his father. "Okay," Jasper said. "Show me." And Dr. Soren Ackley hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than 2 seconds, and Jasper Bowden would spend the next 14 months of his life inside it. It was not confusion. Jasper had watched 100 people search for a word, and this was not that. This was a man deciding whether he was allowed to say something in front of a specific person in the room. Beside him, Nadine had already stood up. She was on her feet before the doctor finished the sentence, not rising, not unfolding herself out of a plastic chair the way a startled mother does, but standing, coat on, weight already forward, and her right hand had gone into her coat pocket and come out with her keys, and her thumb was on the fob. Jasper's first thought, and he was never proud of it, was that she had misunderstood and thought they were being sent to a hospital. His second thought arrived about a half-second later and rearranged his entire life. She wasn't reaching for her keys because they were leaving. She was reaching for her keys because she was. "I'll take him," Nadine said. Her voice was completely level. "Jasper, get his shoe. Doctor, if there's a question about the images, we'll get them read properly at Northline. My mother's on the board there." Which was not true, which had never been true, and which Jasper heard land in the room like a wrench dropped on concrete. Ackley didn't move. He said, quietly, "Ma'am, I'd like everyone to stay for a few minutes. He has school." "It's 8:40 at night," Jasper said. He didn't say it loudly. He said it the way he said things to junior engineers when they'd written a conclusion the data didn't support. And Nadine turned and looked at him, and for the first time in 17 years, Jasper Bowden did not recognize his wife's face. There was no fear in it. Fear he would have understood. Fear is what a mother's face does in a room like that. What was in her face was arithmetic. She was calculating a distance and a drive time, and he could see her doing it. "Nadine," he said, "sit down." She looked at the door. Then she looked at Callum. One flick of the eyes, less than a second, the kind of glance you give a suitcase you've decided you can't carry. And Jasper felt something in his chest go cold and very, very still, the way it did when he pulled a fracture surface out of the ultrasonic bath and saw beach marks on it, and understood that the thing in his hand had been failing for years while everybody drove around on it. "Callum," Ackley said gently, "Buddy, I'm going to have Rosa take you down to get a juice. Is that okay?" Callum looked at his mother. Callum looked at his father. Callum, who was 11 and who saw the field 2 seconds before it happened, said, "Okay," and went. And at the door, he stopped and looked back at Jasper and not at her. The second the door clicked, Nadine said, "This is ridiculous," and put her hand on the handle. "Doctor," Jasper said, "show me the scan." Ackley took them down the hall to a reading room with 2 monitors and a cold cup of coffee on the desk, and a radiologist stood up when they came in. Her name was Dr. Constance Fife. She had the images already up, and she did not do any of the softening that doctors usually do. "This is your son's right ankle," she said. "Lateral and mortise views. The sprain is a sprain. Grade 2, he'll be fine." "Okay," Jasper said. "That's not why we called you in." She moved the cursor. "This is the distal tibial physis, the growth plate. In an 11-year-old boy, I expect an open plate, a dark band, wide, obvious. Yours is almost gone. There's a thin sliver here, at the medial edge, and the rest is fused." She turned. "Bone age is an estimate, not an exact science, and I'm going to want a proper hand film to say it formally. But this is not an 11-year-old skeleton. If you handed me this film blind, I would tell you it belongs to a boy of 15, possibly 15 and a half. Jasper heard the sentence and did what he always did, which was to check it for other explanations before he let it in. Could that be genetic? Precocious puberty? Something? It could. It happens. That's the first thing I'd chase. Fife clicked. It's not the only thing on this film. The second image came up, and she drew a circle with the cursor around 3 faint lines in the shaft of the fibula, and then 2 more, higher. Healed stress fractures, at least 5. Different vintages. You can see the callus is heavier here and almost fully remodeled here, which means they didn't happen together. This is a bone that has been repeatedly loaded past its limit and repaired itself, repeatedly, without ever being immobilized. She looked at him. "Has your son ever been treated for a stress fracture?" "No." "Has he ever complained of pain in that leg?" Jasper opened his mouth and closed it. "Callum, in the car, in June, saying his shin was buzzing. Callum sang it in a voice so casual that Jasper had said, buzzing, and Callum had said, it goes away, and that had been the whole conversation. Behind him, he heard Nadine say, kids get shin splints. Fife did not look at her at all. Third thing, she said, and pulled up the last image. And this one was not the ankle. It was a scout view, a wider frame the machine had taken to set up the study, and it caught the back of the calf and the lower part of the leg. There was a small, dense, perfectly straight white cylinder in the soft tissue. Jasper leaned in before he knew he was doing it. It was maybe 3 millimeters by 9. It had crisp geometric ends. It had, along one side, a series of short radiopaque bands, unevenly spaced. He had been looking at manufactured objects for 19 years, and he knew exactly 2 things instantly, in his body, before his brain caught up. The first was that this was not a fragment of anything. Fragments are ugly. Fragments have torn edges. This had been made. The second was that those bands were not decoration. That was a code. There is a foreign body in your son's leg, Fife said. It is not shrapnel, and it is not a retained fragment. It's an implant. It's radiopaque. It's cylindrical. It has manufactured ends, and it's sitting in a subcutaneous pocket that has a healed track leading to it. Someone put it there, on purpose, with a trocar. Nobody said anything. Mr. Bowden, Fife said, there is no pediatric subcutaneous implant that looks like that. There's contraception, which he does not need. There's a chip for a dog. And then there is a class of compounded hormone pellet used in adult wellness clinics, which are not approved for anyone under 18 for any indication in the United States, and which, if that's what it is, I would very much like to know how it got into a 6th grader. Jasper turned around. Nadine was standing by the door with her keys in her fist, and she was not looking at the screen. She had not looked at the screen once. Nadine, he said, what is in our son? And his wife of 17 years said, you don't understand how any of this works, and pulled the door open, and walked out of the building, and drove away. Later, people would ask Jasper why he didn't run after her. He always gave the same answer, and people never liked it. Because I already had the part in my hand, he said. Chasing her would have been chasing a story. The part doesn't need her story. What he actually did, in the 11 minutes after his wife left, was this. He asked Dr. Fife to leave the images on the screen, and he took 31 photographs of the monitors with his phone, including the header bar with the accession number and the timestamp. He asked her, out loud, in front of Ackley, to make a note in the chart that he had requested the study not be amended or deleted. Then he took out his phone and dictated a memo to himself, the way he did at a failure site before anything gets moved. Date, time, who was in the room, what was said, in what order. Then he asked the question that decided the next 14 months. If you take it out, he said, who owns it? Ackley blinked. Owns it. It's an object, Jasper said. Somebody manufactured it. It has a lot code on it. Those bands are a lot code, or a date code, or both. If it goes in a red bag, it's medical waste, and it's gone forever. I need it bagged, sealed, signed, and logged, and I need a photograph of it in the bag with the seal number, and I need every person who touches it to write their name down. Fife looked at him for a moment. You've done this before. I do it for a living, Jasper said. It's called chain of custody. It's the only reason anything I ever find means anything. At 2 a.m, in the pediatric wing at Northline Children's Hospital in Indianapolis, a surgeon made a 9-millimetre incision in the back of Callum Bowden's left calf and removed a cylinder of compressed crystalline material, discolored and partially eroded, and dropped it into a specimen container that a police officer sealed and initialed. There were, by then, 4 adults in the room whose names Jasper did not know that morning and would not forget for the rest of his life. A child abuse pediatrician named Dr. Leora Mensah, a detective, a hospital social worker, and a very young nurse who kept touching Callum's hair. There was also, 3 floors down at 2:40 a.m., an 11-year-old boy asking his father a question in the dark. Am I in trouble? No. Is Mom? Jasper sat down on the edge of the bed. He had spent 19 years refusing to say things he could not support. and he was not going to start lying now, at the exact moment his son needed to be able to believe him for the next several years. "I don't know yet," he said. "I know that something was done to you that shouldn't have been done. I know it wasn't your fault, and I know I'm going to find out exactly what it was, and exactly who did it, and exactly when." He put his hand on the blanket over Callum's shin, over the bone that had broken 5 times without anyone stopping. "That's the only thing I'm actually good at, bud. You got lucky." Callum was quiet for a while. Then he said, "It's the vitamin thing. From the clinic. She said it was a vitamin thing so I wouldn't get sick during season. How many times? I don't know. Every few months? Since I was 9. He thought about it. "It stings for like a day." Jasper Bowden sat in a dark hospital room and did the arithmetic of a very ordinary boy's very ordinary childhood. 2 Tuesdays a month for 2 years, an appointment his wife called physical therapy, and a boy who had been told that the sting in his arm was a vitamin. Then he went out into the corridor and, at 3 in the morning, wrote the first line of the only kind of document he knew how to write. Failure analysis, preliminary, subject, C. Bowden, AGE, 11. Observed, premature physeal closure, 5 healed stress fractures, multiple vintages, 1 subcutaneous implant, manufactured, lot marked. Question, what broke, when, and why? Halyard Materials Engineering has a policy against personal work on company instruments, and Jasper Bowden had personally written it. He drove to the lab at 6 in the morning, woke his lab director, Bertrand Kolar, and told him the entire thing standing in the parking lot in the dark. Bert listened without interrupting, which was the single kindest thing anyone did for Jasper that year, and then said, "You're not touching it." "I am. You'll stand behind the yellow line and you'll narrate, and I'll sign every page." That distinction, Bert's hands, Bert's signature, Jasper's questions, was what made everything that came afterward survive a courtroom. They photographed the sealed container. They logged the seal number. They opened it, and Bert put the eroded cylinder on the stage of the scanning electron microscope, and the two of them looked at a 9-millimetre object at 400 times magnification. It was a compressed pellet. Under the beam, its surface was pitted and channeled, the way a slow-release matrix erodes. Energy dispersive spectroscopy gave them the elemental map, carbon, oxygen, and a stearate binder, which is exactly what you find in a compounded pellet, and exactly nothing like a microchip. And on one flat end, laser etched at a size no human eye would ever find, in characters 400 microns tall, there was a mark. Bert read it out, and Jasper wrote it on the whiteboard. CPX 722 1440. CPX 72 1440. RUO. What's RUO? Bert said. Research use only, Jasper said. It's the label you put on something so you can sell it without a prescription. It means, this is not for humans. It means whoever bought this signed a form that said they wouldn't put it in a person. He stood there looking at 3 groups of characters on a whiteboard in a cold lab at 7:10 in the morning, and for the first time since the door of that reading room, he felt something other than the cold. He felt the thing he felt at a failure site when the fracture surface finally faced the light and he could see the origin. A tiny, bright, obvious little point where the whole disaster had started, that everybody had walked past for years. Every part remembers where it came from. "Bert," he said, 221140 is a lot number. Lot numbers shipped to a purchaser. Purchasers sign for them. By 10 that morning, Nadine had a lawyer. By noon, she had a story, and it was a good one, which was the frightening part. Jasper Bowden, she said, was a man who worked with chemicals and machines and had never been comfortable with his son's athletic career. He had become obsessive. He had recently been asking about his son's medications. He had removed his son from her care in the middle of the night without her consent and consented to a surgical procedure on a minor while she was, quote, forced to leave a room because of his behavior. She was, her filing said, in fear. There was a photograph attached to the filing. It was Jasper in the hallway at Northline at 3 a.m., gray-faced, unshaven, writing on a legal pad in block capitals, and it made him look exactly as unhinged as she needed him to look. She filed at 11:40 a.m. for an emergency order granting her sole temporary custody. And that afternoon, While a judge's clerk was still date-stamping the petition, a records technician at a place called Stride Performance Medicine, on the second floor of a medical arts building 9 minutes from the Ridgeway Complex, was told to run everything in the pediatric drawer through the shredder before close of business. Her name was Greta Nyland. She was 23. She had worked there 14 months. She did not run it through the shredder. To understand what Nadine Bowden had done, you have to understand what she had been sold. Emile Vesey had arrived in Wolcott 9 years earlier with a resume that fit on one page and impressed everybody on it. 2 seasons in the Dutch second tier, a UEFA badge, a stint at an academy outside Rotterdam. He had a way of standing at the fence with his arms folded and saying nothing for 20 minutes, and then leaning over to one particular mother and saying, quietly, "He's not like the others, is he?" And that was usually all it took. The pathway was Emile's invention, and it was, as a piece of design, close to perfect. It cost $18,000 a year, which bought a parent the right to say the word pathway in a parking lot. It came with a development agreement, a 19-page document that assigned Pathway Development Group LLC a percentage of any future professional earnings and full commercial image rights for the player until age 23, in exchange for career management services. Almost nobody read it. The ones who read it signed it anyway, because Emile would say, kindly, that of course they didn't have to, and that Concord simply couldn't invest at this level in a family that wasn't invested back. It came with the showcases, Bradenton, Dallas, a summer trip to Portugal, where men from other clubs and other countries stood behind the goals with notebooks, and it came with Stride. Stride Performance Medicine had a medical director named Dr. Porter Craven, a man who had discovered, in his early 50s, that adult men will pay $400 a month forever to feel 29, and who had built a very comfortable practice on that discovery. Emile had come to him with a business proposition that Craven, in his own later testimony, described as the easiest yes of my life. Concord would send its pathway families to Stride for athlete monitoring. Craven would bill them. And for the small number of boys Emile identified as genuine assets, Craven would provide what Emile called, in writing, in an email that would eventually be blown up to 6 feet across on a screen, acceleration. Acceleration was a compounded slow-release pellet, ordered under a research-use-only account from a compounding facility outside Reno, containing recombinant growth hormone secretagogue and, in the older lots, a low-dose androgen. It was implanted subcutaneously in the back of the upper arm or the calf, every 90 to 120 days, under local anesthetic, in a treatment room with a poster of a mountain on the wall. There were 31 children on the list. And running alongside it, because Emile Vesey was not a man who left money on a table, was the other half of the machine. Every pathway boy was registered with a birth certificate that Concord's own registrar prepared, and roughly a third of those certificates were wrong by 1 or 2 years. A 12-year-old who plays as a 10-year-old is not a prospect. He is a phenomenon. Phenomena win showcases. Showcases produce buyers. Buyers pay placement fees to Pathway Development Group LLC, which paid a management fee to Broadstep Travel and Logistics, which was owned by a man named Drake Ainsworth. Drake Ainsworth was Nadine's brother. That was where she had come in, 4 years earlier, and it had happened so gradually that she had never had to decide anything. First, she was a mom who organized carpools. Then she was a mom who was very good at talking to other moms. Then she was, formally, on a 1099, Concord's family liaison, at $9,000 a month, and her job was to sit across from a woman in a kitchen and explain that the window was closing. And somewhere in the second year, on a Thursday in a hotel in Kansas City, Emile Vesey had put his hand on her shoulder the way he did with the fathers, and Nadine Bowden had stopped being a person who was being lied to and started being a person who lied. Jasper found the outline of all of that in 19 days, working every night from 9 to 2 at the kitchen table, and he found it the way he found everything, which was by refusing to look for a villain and insisting on looking for a timeline. He did not go to the club. He did not confront Emile. He printed things. He printed 4 years of the family's credit card statements and highlighted every charge to Stride, 22 visits. He cross-referenced each date against the shared calendar and then against the truck's own mileage log, because Jasper had kept a fuel log since he was 19. He built a spreadsheet with a column for what he had been told and a column for what had actually happened, and those two columns became, later, the most quoted single image of the entire case. He pulled Callum's Concord registration from the parent portal and sat back in his chair. The date of birth on the file was wrong by 22 months. His son, in the eyes of every tournament, every scout, and every insurer, was 9 years old. He printed the development agreement. He got to page 14 and stopped, because there on the signature line, in blue, was his own name. Jasper Bowden had not signed it. He had never seen it. He sat in his kitchen at 1 in the morning and looked at a forgery of his own hand and felt, distinctly, the moment his grief turned into something with a much longer half-life. Then he did what a materials man does with a document. He took it to the lab on Saturday and put it on the stage of the stereo microscope at 40 times, and he photographed the signature under raking light, and then under infrared. And the ink over the printed line showed no pen pressure valleys at the crossings, no indentation at all in the paper fibers. It was a laser print. Somebody had lifted a scan of his signature from a permission slip and dropped it into a PDF. He wrote it up in 6 pages with figures, and he signed it, and he had Bert sign it, and he put it in a folder. On the 22nd day, Jasper Bowden made the only phone call in this entire story that was not about his own son. 5 years earlier, there had been a boy at Concord named Rudy Deming who everybody in the county had been sure about. Jasper found him working the parts counter at a farm equipment dealer in Delphi, 19 years old, with a cane hooked over the edge of the counter. Rudy had 2 artificial hips. He'd had the first at 17. A vascular necrosis, they'd told his mother. Bad luck, they'd told his mother. Sometimes a body just does this, they'd told his mother. He had grown 11 inches in 20 months when he was 13, which everyone had celebrated, and by 15 his hips had been the hips of a 50-year-old bricklayer. He sat with Jasper on the loading dock behind the dealership for 2 hours. They called it acceleration, Rudy said. In my arm. Coach V did the drive down himself, said it was for my sleep. He turned a bolt over in his fingers. When my hip went, he stopped taking my calls. Like, the same week. My mom kept calling the office, and they kept saying he was traveling. Did anyone from the club contact her at all after that? Yeah. Rudy laughed, 1 syllable, without any humor in it. A guy came out to the house with papers, said it was for our insurance, so we'd get help with the surgery. He shrugged. We never got anything. Mom refinanced. Jasper wrote that down and underlined it twice, and did not, at that moment, understand what he had just been handed. He would understand it in 11 weeks, and it would be the worst thing he ever learned about another human being. Greta Nyland called him on a Tuesday from a grocery store parking lot and started crying before she finished her own name. She was 23. She had gone to Stride for a front desk job out of community college and had spent 14 months slowly understanding what the Tuesday and Friday afternoon block was. She had been told to shred the pediatric drawer. Instead, she had spent 2 hours photographing every page in it on the copier's document feeder and emailing them to herself, and then she had driven home and sat in her car in her mother's driveway for a very long time. What she had was this: 11 pages of a monitoring roster, with 31 first names and initials and dates, a 2-year run of implant logs with lot numbers, a purchase file from the Reno compounding facility with signed research use only attestations bearing Dr. Porter Craven's signature, and a spiral notebook Craven kept in his desk that was not, technically, anybody's medical record, in which he had written notes to himself. One of those notes read, EV wants 4 cycle on the Bowden kid, told him plates will close. He said fine, we only need 3 more years. Jasper read that sentence at a picnic table outside a Dairy Queen with a 23-year-old girl crying quietly beside him, and he was so calm that it frightened her. Miss Nyland, he said, I need to explain something to you about what happens next, because you deserve to make this decision with real information. He told her that if she gave the file to him, it would be worth much less, because a father with a custody case has a motive, and any competent defense attorney would spend 3 days making her look like a jilted employee. He told her that if she gave it to the right agency herself, directly, it would be evidence. Then he gave her a phone number for a woman named Regan Stiles. Special Agent Regan Stiles worked out of the Chicago field office of the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, and she and Jasper Bowden had spent 6 weeks together in 2019 in a conference room in Michigan, taking apart a hip implant company that had been quietly changing its alloy supplier without telling anybody. Jasper had been the expert who proved it. Stiles had been the agent who had said, on the last day, that in 11 years she had never had an expert witness who volunteered the weaknesses in his own report before the defense found them. She picked up on the second ring. "Bowden," she said. "It's been a while. Please tell me you're calling about metal." "No," Jasper said. "I'm calling because somebody's been putting research-use-only pellets into 31 children, and one of them is mine, and I have the lot numbers." There was a pause on the line that lasted about 4 seconds. "Say that again," Regan Stiles said, slowly. "And Bowden, don't touch anything else. Here is the thing nobody tells you about being right. Being right is slow. A federal investigation into a compounding pharmacy, a licensed physician, and a youth sports organization does not move at the speed of a father's rage. It moves at the speed of grand jury subpoenas, and while it moves, the people you are investigating are allowed to keep living their lives, and in Jasper Bowden's case, they were allowed to keep living in his house with his son." Emil Vesey and Naen did not panic. They did something much more dangerous. They got organized. Their theory of the case was elegant. They did not deny the pellet. Denying the pellet was impossible. It was in an evidence locker. Instead, they agreed with it, and then they moved the blame 2 feet to the left. Naen's amended filing said that she had, in good faith, taken her son to a licensed physician for athlete monitoring, on the recommendation of his club, and had been assured by that physician that the treatment was appropriate. She had been deceived. She was, in fact, a victim. And in the meantime, her husband, a man who worked with acids and electron beams, who had begun photographing documents under infrared light in his employer's laboratory, who had subjected a child to an unnecessary surgical procedure at 2 in the morning, was in the grip of something. They had a professional to say so. Her name was Dr. Cass Farrow, and she was a custody evaluator with a very tidy office and a practice that consisted, almost entirely, of families referred by one particular family law firm. She spent 90 minutes with Jasper, and 40 of those minutes were about the folder. "You brought a binder," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was asked to explain a sequence of events, and I don't trust my memory to be accurate about dates." She wrote something down. Jasper watched her write it and understood, in real time, that a man who documents is a careful man in a laboratory and an obsessive man in a family court, and that these are the same behavior described by 2 different people with 2 different agendas. The hearing was on a Thursday in January. It lasted 50 minutes. Naen cried. She was extremely good at it, and Jasper, who had loved her, who had held her hair back in a hospital bathroom the night Callum was born, sat 6 feet away and watched her produce real tears about a thing she had done. Dr. Farrow used the word rigid 4 times. Concord Football Club submitted a letter, on letterhead, signed by Emil Vesey, expressing the club's concern for Callum's emotional welfare and its willingness to house him in the Ridgeway residential program in a stable environment during this difficult family period. The judge granted Naen temporary primary custody, ordered Jasper to supervised visitation every other Saturday for 2 hours, and, because Concord's letter was persuasive and because the school was on the campus, approved Callum's enrollment in the Ridgeway Residential Academy. That is how Jasper Bowden lost his son to the people who had been dosing him. He did not shout. He did not make a scene. He walked out of the courthouse into a January parking lot and sat in his truck for 40 minutes without starting it, and then he called Regan Stiles and said, in a completely steady voice, they moved him onto the campus. "Tell me what you need and how fast you need it." "Bowden," she said carefully, "I need you to not do anything." "I'm not going to do anything," Jasper said. "I'm going to finish the report." The next 11 weeks were the quietest and worst of his life, and they were also the weeks in which every single thing that mattered got proved. Regan Stiles served a grand jury subpoena on the Reno compounding facility. The shipping records came back and they were beautiful, not because they were incriminating in themselves, but because they were boring. Lot 22, 1140. 400 units. Shipped on a Tuesday to Stride Performance Medicine. Signed for by P. Craven. Against a research use only attestation, stating the material would be used for in vitro work only. There were 9 such lots over 31 months. 1,140 units. Jasper's own report went in as an expert exhibit. The pellet, the elemental map, the erosion profile, the etched lot code, and a single line that Stiles would later say was the most useful sentence a witness ever gave her. The lot code on the object recovered from the child is 221140. This code was applied at manufacture and cannot be applied afterward. It matches the code on units shipped to and signed for by the named facility. The object did not arrive in the child by any other route. Every part remembers where it came from. Dr. Leora Mensa dated the injuries. 5 stress fractures, at intervals consistent with the implant cycle. Growth plates approximately 85% fused at age 11. A projected adult height reduced by 5 to 7 inches from his genetic potential. Her report ended with a sentence Jasper had to put down and walk away from. The clinical picture is that of a child who was chemically aged for the purposes of athletic performance. Emile Vessey's resume fell apart on a Wednesday afternoon in about 4 hours. The Dutch second division club had no record of him. The academy outside Rotterdam did, as a physiotherapist, from 2009 to 2012, released after a disciplinary finding involving the supply of unlicensed supplements to under-17 players. He had never played professional football in his life. The framed shirt in his office had been bought online. And then, in the second week of March, Greta Nyland remembered a filing cabinet. There was a drawer in Dr. Craven's office labeled insurance that everyone assumed was malpractice paperwork. It was not. It was 31 applications for a specialty product called career-ending disability indemnity, a real insurance instrument, used legitimately by professional clubs to protect an investment in an athlete. Each application was for a pathway boy. Each named the child's age from the falsified registration. Each carried a physician's attestation of the athlete's health signed by Porter Craven. Each was for $500,000. And the beneficiary on every single one of them was Pathway Development Group LLC. Jasper Bowden read that file on a Sunday morning at his own kitchen table, and this is the moment where he later said his understanding of the whole thing turned over, like a fracture surface catching the light. He had assumed the damage to the boys was a side effect, a cost of doing business, something Emile regretted in private and tolerated in public. It was not a side effect. It was the second revenue stream. If a boy survived the chemistry, you sold him. If he broke, and the chemistry made breaking a statistical certainty, you collected $500,000. There was no outcome in which Pathway Development Group did not get paid. It was, Jasper said later, on a witness stand, the single most efficient piece of engineering he had ever encountered, and he had spent his entire career around engineers. He went back through the file until he found the name he was looking for. Deming. Our claim filed. Claim paid, $490,000, 3 months after a 17-year-old's first hip replacement. A man had come out to Rudy Deming's house with papers and told his mother it was for their insurance, so they'd get help with the surgery. She had signed. She had refinanced the house to pay for the second hip, and $500,000 had gone to a limited liability company in a strip mall. Jasper called Reagan Stiles at 7:40 on a Sunday morning. "I have the motive," he said. Then he found application number 29 and turned it over, and stopped. The parent's signature on Callum Bowden's $500,000 career-ending disability policy was not forged. It was not a laser print. Under the loop there were pressure valleys at every crossing and a small ink pool at the terminal stroke where the pen had rested. Nadine had signed that one herself. Everything Jasper Bowden had done up to that point, he had done as a scientist. What he did in the next 6 weeks he did as his father's son, because Sherman Bowden had believed something else that he said less often and meant more. It isn't finished when you know. It's finished when everybody who needs to know, knows. The indictments could have come quietly. Regan Stiles was ready to take Emile Vessey out of his own office on a Tuesday morning with 2 agents and a warrant, and the press release would have run 3 paragraphs in the state section, and 30 families would have found out from a text chain, weeks later, in pieces, with the club's lawyers already framing it. Jasper asked her for one thing. There are 30 of them, he said. The other parents. Every one of them is going to spend the rest of their life wondering whether they knew and did nothing. They need to hear it once, at the same time, from the evidence, not from a rumor in a group chat. And they need to hear it in that building. Stiles said no. Then she said maybe. Then, after her supervisor spoke to a prosecutor who had a daughter who played, she said, "You get 11 minutes, you present nothing that isn't already in the indictment, and my people control the doors." Concord Football Club's signing night was the third Friday in April. It was the event of the year at Ridgeway, the turf building with the glass front, 300 folding chairs, a stage, a projector, boys in club jackets, mothers with phones held up. It was where Emil Vesey announced commitments and named the incoming pathway class and showed a highlight reel with music. Scouts came, a regional sports reporter came, there was a slideshow and a sponsor slot and catered chicken in aluminum trays. Jasper Bowden ran the program. She always had. She had, 6 weeks earlier, in the middle of a custody fight and with a straight face, put her estranged husband on the run of show for 11 minutes under the heading Parent Reflection, because it looked good, because it looked reasonable, because a woman who lets the father speak at signing night is not a woman hiding anything. She emailed him the schedule herself. Jasper wrote back one line, "I'll need the projector." He wore what he wore to depositions. Gray jacket, no tie, reading glasses in the breast pocket. He arrived at 6:10 and helped a woman he didn't know carry a tray of cookies in from her minivan. He said hello to 14 people. He sat in the third row on the aisle and watched his own wife work the room in a green dress, laughing, touching forearms, being magnificent at the thing she was best at in the world. Callum sat in the front row with the other academy boys in a Navy club jacket with his name stitched on the chest. He had been on the campus for 11 weeks. He was 2 inches taller than he had been in October, and he looked, from 20 feet away, like a tired man of 22 wearing an 11-year-old's face. He found his father in the third row and did not look away. Emil Vesey spoke for 20 minutes. He was very good. He talked about windows and about the difference between a boy who wants it and a boy who is willing, and he named the incoming class, and each family stood up and got applause. Behind him on the screen was the club crest and the phrase they printed on everything, "Built, not born." At 7:41, Naen came to the lectern and said, "Before the highlight reel, one of our pathway dads asked to say a few words. Jasper?" There was polite applause. Jasper Bowden walked up the side aisle with a laptop under his arm, plugged the HDMI cable in himself, and stood at the lectern while the projector found the signal. "My name is Jasper Bowden," he said. "Callum's dad. I'm a metallurgist. My job is failure analysis. When something breaks and people want to know why, they send me the pieces." The room settled, the way a room does when it decides a speaker is going to be charming. "A failure analysis has 3 questions," he said. "What broke, when, and why?" It doesn't ask who's sorry. It doesn't care what anybody meant. It only reads what the part remembers. He clicked. The club crest disappeared, and an X-ray filled the screen, 18 feet wide. On October the 12th, my son rolled his ankle on the near field, about 40 yards from where you're all sitting. This is the film from that night. The sprain is the least interesting thing in it. He talked for 11 minutes, and he never raised his voice once. He showed them the growth plate, and the thin sliver of it that was left, and he read Dr. Mensa's sentence out loud, and 300 people in folding chairs heard the words chemically aged for the purposes of athletic performance in a building with a mural of a boy running toward stadium lights. He showed them the 5 healed stress fractures with a white arrow on each. He showed them the scout view and the small white cylinder in a child's calf, and he let it sit there for 8 full seconds without saying anything at all, which was the longest 8 seconds in the history of the Ridgeway Complex. Then he clicked, and there it was at 400 times magnification, filling the entire screen, pitted, eroded, alien, 9 millimeters of something taken out of a 6th grader at 2 in the morning. Somewhere near the back, a woman said, "Oh my God," in a completely ordinary voice, the way you do when you drop a glass. "This is not a chip," Jasper said. "It's a compressed, slow-release pellet. Here's the elemental map. And here, click, is the end of it. Laser etched at manufacture, 400 microns tall. CPX7, 22, 14 SEER, 2040 SEER, low 140. RUO means research use only. It means the buyer signed a form promising it would never go into a human being. He clicked. This is that form. This is the shipping manifest for lot 22-1140. 400 units, signed for by Dr. Porter Craven at Stride Performance Medicine. 9 minutes from this parking lot. 9 lots. 1,140 units over 31 months. He looked out at them. Every one of you who was told your son was going to Stride for monitoring, I'd like you to do the arithmetic on 1,100 units with me. Nobody moved. Emil Vesey was standing at the side of the stage with his arms folded, and he had not moved either. And Jasper had been watching him in his peripheral vision the entire time, the way you watch a load-bearing weld. 2 more things, Jasper said. Then I'll sit down. Click. 31 birth certificates from the Concord Registrar's file, next to 31 certificates from 3 county recorders' offices. 11 of them don't match. My son's is wrong by 22 months. Some of you are about to recognize your own child's name on this slide, and I am sorry that this is how you're finding out. And I want you to understand that I looked for a gentler way to do this for 6 weeks, and there isn't one. There was a sound in the room now, low and moving, like weather. Last thing. Click. This is a career-ending disability indemnity application. It's a real financial product. Clubs use it to protect an investment in an athlete. There are 31 of them in a filing cabinet at Stride. 1 for every boy on the monitoring roster. Each one is for $500,000. The physician's health attestation on every one of them is signed by Dr. Craven. He paused. The beneficiary on every single one of them is Pathway Development Group LLC. A man 3 rows behind Jasper stood up. Not to shout, he just stood up. The way people stand up when sitting has stopped being possible. I want to be precise, because precision is the only thing I have to offer you, Jasper said. This means that if your son had made it, the club would have been paid. And if your son broke, and the chemistry in that pellet makes breaking a near certainty, the club would also have been paid. 5 years ago, a Concord boy named Rudy Deming had his first hip replaced at 17. His mother refinanced her house for the second one. Click. That's the claim. $490,000. Paid. She never saw a cent of it. She's here tonight. She's in the 4th row. Her name is Marilyn, and I'd ask you not to crowd her. Emil Vesey started to move toward the lectern. He got 2 steps. Coach, Jasper said, without turning. Before you do that, the last slide. Click. It was a single page. Application 29. Callum Bowden. And a signature, magnified 4 times under raking light, with the pressure valleys and the little pool of ink at the end of the stroke, visible to everyone in the building. That's not a forgery, Jasper said. I checked it the way I'd check a weld. He looked for the first time all night at the woman standing frozen by the AV cart in the green dress. That's my wife's hand. Nadine Bowden did not say anything. She turned toward the side door and put her hand in her pocket and came out with her keys. And this time, standing at the back of the room by that exact door with her jacket open and her credentials on a chain around her neck, was Special Agent Regan Stiles. They took Emil Vesey out through the front, past 300 folding chairs, and nobody made a sound except one boy in the front row who was crying, and it wasn't Callum. Callum Bowden got up out of the front row while his mother was being read her rights 40 feet away, and walked the length of that turf building on a floor he had trained on since he was 8, and put his arms around his father's waist and did not let go for a very long time. The indictments ran to 91 counts. Emil Vesey was convicted of conspiracy, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to introduce a misbranded drug into interstate commerce, and 11 counts of insurance fraud, and was sentenced to 24 years. The court's sentencing memo used the phrase, "an enterprise whose profit model required the injury of children," and the judge read that phrase out loud twice. Dr. Porter Craven surrendered his license, cooperated too late to matter, and got 11 years. The compounding facility in Nevada was shut down, and its owner pled. Drake Ainsworth got 9 years for his half of the money and, at his sentencing, blamed his sister. Concord Football Club dissolved. The Ridgeway Complex was sold to the county, and the mural was painted over, and the fields are still there, and kids still play on them on Saturday mornings, which Jasper thinks is exactly right. Nadine took a plea at 7 years. She lost her parental rights in a separate proceeding that took under an hour, because the signature on application 29 did most of the work. Dr. Cass Farrow's evaluation was stricken, and the state board opened a file on her that is, as of this recording, still open. Jasper saw his wife one more time, across a table, because Callum asked to write her a letter, and Jasper would not deliver it without reading it to her himself. "You could have just asked me," she said, "about any of it. You never asked." "I did ask," Jasper said, "in February, about a bruise. You told me it was a cleat." She didn't have anything for that. He folded the letter and put it back in his pocket and stood up. There was a fund, in the end, a settlement out of the club's insurance and the forfeiture, administered by the court, that pays for medical monitoring for all 31 boys until they're 35. Endocrinology, cardiac, orthopedic. Rudy Deming's third surgery was the first thing it paid for, and his mother's house came off the market. He works in the parts department still. He says he likes knowing where every piece goes. Callum is 13 now. He will finish somewhere around 5'7", which is 5 inches shorter than his father, and his cardiologist is cautiously optimistic and will be watching him for 20 years. He does not play club soccer. He plays on Sundays in a rec league with a bunch of kids who are terrible, and he is, by all accounts, insufferable about it. On Saturdays, he goes to work with his dad. There is a photograph on Bert Kolar's desk of the two of them at the electron microscope, the boy on the stool with his eye to the eyepiece, and his father standing behind him with his hand on the back of the chair. Callum is looking at a fatigue fracture in a broken bolt, at the beach marks, the little curved lines that record every single load cycle a part endured before it finally let go. "How many?" Jasper asked him. Callum counted for a while. "Like 140. "That's 140 times somebody used it wrong and it held anyway," Jasper said. "And then it didn't. That's not the bolt's fault." Callum thought about that for a second, still looking down the eyepiece. "Do I have those?" he said. "Yeah, bud," his father said. "You do. Every part remembers where it came from." He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "But you get to decide what it remembers next. So that's the story, and I want to leave you with the part that I can't put down." Jasper Bowden didn't win because he was tougher than them or angrier than them. He was, by every account, the least dramatic person in that building. He won because he understood something most of us never think about, that evidence has a shelf life, and the first 10 minutes are the whole game. In that reading room, with his life detonating, he took 31 photographs, asked for a note in the chart, and said the words chain of custody out loud in front of witnesses. And every conviction in this case grew out of that one boring decision by a man who was too shocked to feel anything. And then there's the other thing, which is heavier. Nobody in that story hurt Callum out of hatred. That's what makes it worth telling. Emil Vesey wasn't a monster in a mask. He was a business model. Porter Craven signed forms. Nadine drove a minivan to appointments. 30 parents wrote checks. Every single person involved could explain, sincerely, why what they were doing was reasonable, and the explanation was always the same one. The window is closing, and everybody else is doing it, and I'm doing this for him. That's the sentence to be afraid of. Not, I don't care what happens to my kid. Nobody says that. The dangerous one is, I'm doing this for him, said by an adult who has quietly started measuring a child by what the child can produce. So here's what I'd take from it. Ask the boring question. Go to the appointment you were told you'd find dull. Read page 14. And when somebody who wants something from you tells you a window is closing, understand that urgency is not information. Urgency is a technique. A body keeps its own records, so does steel, and paper, and ink, and a shipping manifest with a lot number on it. Almost everything in this world is quietly writing down what was done to it. Somebody just has to be willing to read it. If that landed, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.